Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is part 3, which is where we talk about a specific dance piece that Graeme first did for ADT back in 1982.
Yes.
82, and which I was in. So we're going to show stuff on the screen as we talk about it. So let's just talk a bit about the preamble to it, how it happened, or...
It had a long gestation period, and I wasn't even sure what company I'd be able to do it with.
Oh, wow.
And it's quite it's a cross between an observation. I wanted to observe Australian suburbia and the notion of the demands, what compromises people made to be able to sustain, have their own home and their backyard and so forth. But that connected to my wife at the time, Vanessa, and I splitting up, which was in early 1980. And that's where the seed began, because we were living in Lewisham, within a kind of Sydney suburban area. And I thought, we're one of our conflicts is this suburban thing where, in all fairness, Vanessa wanted to have a home, she wanted to have 3 more children. We already had our son Dana, so that was fermenting. So I just started to make observations of neighbours and how I was told it was really popular overseas because it represented the idyllic suburban kind of life.
What's that?
That
reality show was called So Many Waters?
Sylvania Waters.
Sylvania Waters.
Which was the first virtual reality television program. So that all began to sort of go through my head, and then I began to look at the notion of the kind of role-playing and stereotyping that media presented in terms of men and women. So you'd see television commercials where good on you, mum.
Yes.
Yeah, that whole
that's right.
celebration of the mother.
Margarine.
Yeah. And then finally, Jonathan Taylor, artistic director of ADT, got in touch and said, would you make a work? And that gave me about a 6-month period before I was actually going to come to Adelaide.
That was the first time you'd worked with ADT?
Yes. Right. Yes. So I thought about it, and I started to, and even though Vanessa and I had split up well and truly, I considered her to be a very good theatre designer. She had a dancing background. She'd been a dancer with the dance company in New South Wales. She'd designed a couple of works for me for the Sydney Dance Company, and a major one was LM514.
So LM514 was before HaHa?
Yeah, so that was about 6 months before when I choreographed LM514, and then...
Yeah, because I thought they were about the same time.
Yeah.
Contemporary.
And so I approached her and said, okay, we've got our differences personally, but would you design HaHa? And the reason, and I explained to her what it was about, and I was quite honest that it was a reflection on our relationship, what it had been and what it had become. So she was fine with that. She said, okay. And her only stipulation was, can you trust me with the design?
Just leave it to her.
Just let me do the design. So so the next thing was to find the music.
So the design we see, as we see up there now, which is very striking, and certainly in 1982, this would have been a groundbreaking piece in terms of the design alone, actually.
Yes,
I would have said, because this use of plastic materials, very, very bright, shiny, superficial.
Yeah, well, that was the whole idea. She said, not all suburban life is plastic, but there is a kind of another side of it that is plastic, Tupperware, all of that.
Exactly. Bright, shiny objects, clean surfaces. So that's why we see that now. Now, it's easy to look at and say, well, that's what everybody's done. But in fact, in 1982, this was actually a very, very, well, a groundbreaking piece in that sense. Not just choreographically, but design piece. And you've got an anecdote about Alan Brissenden, who's probably one of Australia's best reviewers, who lives in Adelaide, and so saw this. And so just tell us the story about that before we go any further.
Yeah. Alan saw the work, wrote a scathing review, really tore it apart. I can't remember the exact words, but it was just not like art or dance or whatever. But then it was performed again later in the year in Adelaide, and Alan saw the work and actually wrote a new review and actually apologised for his previous review in saying that he completely got it wrong, that he had a certain expectation of what it was going to be, and in fact it completely set him at a complete loss.
Okay, well that's a wonderful thing for him to do, and I guess it's a mark of the man himself that he was prepared to completely retrace his steps and analyse it differently. But I guess that shows you how, I guess, shocking it was in a sense. And when I say shocking, I don't mean shocking in a sort of a sexual threatening way, because there's no content that's actually...
No, it's just provocative about it, almost the parody of suburbia and leisure time and...
But the shock was the sort of the newness of it, really, wasn't it? And because it has a white floor, so it's a very bright piece, very bright from word go, and that goes against the ADT generally had a very black floor which was shiny, but it was a black look, and this would have been the first time I suppose they ever did, maybe the only time they ever used a white floor. So anyway, so that's an interesting anecdote about the story of the piece. So just go back to how it started.
It's just different thoughts, and it's at that stream of consciousness where I thought, okay, look at the domestic. So I thought that's where the carpet cleaners, the sweepers, the manual sweepers would come in. I then also looked at the kind of a collective suburban where people might gather to dance and where people might meet socially, which is a section I think you'll find with you and Vanessa the first time you make that encounter.
Yes.
And then it turns out that then there's that other side where in fact you're co-workers. So I was looking at suburbia.
Sex in the workplace.
And then Victoria, who was basically your partner in the work. So
she's the wife.
Yes.
And did you have this cast before you came to Adelaide?
No.
Okay.
I just thought these were the certain principal characters that I needed. And you can't do too many characters. So the thing was you and Tori as husband and wife, your relationship to your secretary, which was Vanessa McIntosh, and then your relationship, well, more so for you, your relationship, or where you were conflicted in terms of your secretary and your wife. So looking at, and part of that idea actually came out of working in Launceston with Tas Dance.
Oh yeah.
And I was told, you should go to this bar, this very upmarket bar. And I went, okay. So I went to this upmarket bar, and here were businessmen with their secretaries, their co-workers, having a drink. And then at this was about 5:30. By 6:30, the place was almost deserted. And so the person who told me, I said, really strange. She said, well, basically, these co-workers are having sexual relationships and they go off, have sex, then go home to their various lives beyond.
Domestic lives.
Yeah, domestic lives. So that came into my head. the next thing was actually for it to at least have a positive quality to it. That it yes, there were maybe drama in there, but it was like you have to deal in life with those dramas. Mm-hmm. So I wanted it to be, what did one person call it when they actually saw it? It had a sense of grace.
That's interesting, isn't it?
That was
and
grace.
You, I mean, even though that person made that observation external to you, they told you about it. You think you instinctively want to put something gracious in there, grace?
Oh yes, I wanted, in terms of your relationship with Vanessa, the secretary, Tori's relationship with you as the wife, that it was still about humanity.
Right.
It was still, and I didn't want a notion of those two relationships to be destructive. Mm-hmm. That you examined it and you moved out of it, or it comes to some sort of what I call positive resolution.
Right. It's interesting from my perspective because I think not that we ever talked. I don't think we ever talked about it at all, did we? You just did stuff
and
we never.
No, not really.
I don't think we ever talked about my motivation or anything.
No, it was just hopefully the movement.
Yeah.
Was going.
So that's interesting too. So rather than sort of construct some sort of
narrative
or intellectual thing, it was all just we did stuff and it turned out this way. So it's interesting how that's been arrived at instinctively or unconsciously rather than sort of deliberately. Because I'd never thought I actually had a relationship with Vanessa. I never consummated the relationship. It was all a dream thing.
Yeah.
In fact, you'll see a solo halfway through, which I think is explicitly makes that apparent without us ever talking about, which is interesting. So you could see, I can see the piece as a dream sequence. The whole thing's a dream sequence.
Well, it's in the previous interview, I was talking about that notion that there's certain things that you don't talk about, and you have to allow the dancer the freedom to interpret. So this movement, I feel this particular movement in a very personal way. And then if you put, let's say, a couple together, they then, with the choreography, start feeding off one another. So there were two elements. I just did choreography where you had this urge to touch. Mm-hmm. Then there was the duet that you did with Tori, your wife, where there were what I call two kind of duets, the bowls, where she was completely separated from her, but that whole thing of bowls going to the white cue. But then leading on from that, that beginning of smelling the body, the two of you getting close and smelling each other before you, but I didn't go, oh, you smell one another. It was just like,
yes.
And the hand with Vanessa against your head, like trying to create, again, it's, that's one of the rare occasions where she makes an explicit touch to you, to your forehead.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because dance does that stuff marvellously well, doesn't it? You don't need to intellectualise dance because, in fact, I guess you're saying you're allowing the audience to make up their story as they see these gestures. And one of the things I talk about is the difference between gesture and choreography. And to me, gesture is just story, and choreography turns into space-time.
Tends to be kind of an abstraction.
Yeah, an abstraction and also an amplification, because by doing some gesture like that, you can actually amplify it. Whereas if I just do the touch, of course, and what dance does, I think, better than anything else is that amplification of unconscious energies born by creating a sort of a landscape of rhythm and space and time, if you like, and that becomes very apparent to the audience, doesn't
it? Well, the thing I think people should know, I've just had a look at HaHa on video screen, and I haven't seen it since 1982. And the one thing, I actually got quite emotional because the thing you were talking about, all the dancers had it. They actually, you can see the internalisation occurring in their bodies, and because of certain movements, none of those movements are actually disconnected from here. It's all locked in, and when this goes here and that leg goes there, they're all coming from this central thought in the body. And the other thing on reviewing it was what I call, a lot of musicians have commented, it kind of looks improvised. You look at it and you go, it doesn't at times, even though you've got unison couples, it's almost like when rave parties were the fashion, and with that techno music, trance dancing, when suddenly everyone is locked into this one movement.
Yeah, and the physical activity became one with the actual rhythm of the music.
Yeah.
They weren't dancing to the music, they became the music,
Yeah.
all sorts of things
Yeah.
like that. So I suppose we should stop talking about it and let's just put it on.
Okay.
And then we can actually talk about. So we're going to stop and start a fair bit this thing here. So we'll start with the beginning. The curtain's just gone up, and you'll see it behind us. And we'll just stop and start as Graeme has some point he wants to make. I'll just take that down. So this was a very striking start.
Yeah, domestic morning.
Do you want to stop and talk about what that happens there?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's yours truly on stage.
So yeah, you have basically husband and wife with this kind of, I suppose the word you could comment is that notion of the Greek chorus. So the other women are like a Greek chorus, so they're going to make a commentary on the situation between.
And there's 5 of them.
Yes.
So let's just talk about, I think, is that Jackie Murphy in the front, then Tori?
No, Tori.
Or that's Simone Clifford?
That's Simone Clifford, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Simone, then Tori, and then Jackie Murphy at the back.
Yeah. And Sue
Peacock.
Sue Peacock.
And who's the last?
Linda.
Linda Gay.
Yeah.
I mean, I always saw these things as 5 aspects of the female.
Oh yeah, and each of them, as the work unfolds, you start to see these different aspects. So the first primary one is Tori, the wife, and the whole idea of this male character who expected certain things to be ready.
Where are my shoes? I think I'm saying, where are
Yeah,
my shoes?
with
Where's my
shoes,
socks or something?
Which, as someone was saying to me, that men are always losing their socks, and they're not sure where this is, and they're always asking their wife or their partner, have you seen whatever? So that's basically that scene. And I think the other thing that people might not have been aware of in terms of ADT, I might stand corrected, that you actually had dialogue, that there was an interchange between you and Tori.
It's interesting because they talk about a thing called, men have what they call a fridge look, which they look in the fridge and they say nothing's there. Because in fact there's lots of stuff there, but not the thing they want.
Yeah.
And I guess this is the equivalent of a fridge look. And I think I'm saying, where are my socks or something? And Tori's going, well, I don't know. And obviously I'm early morning, I'm off to go to work.
Yeah.
So, gee, any more observations? Or
No,
continue?
that's it.
So, some sort of domestics of interaction. I guess I can't remember now, but I'm probably complaining about something wasn't ready or I didn't have my breakfast or something.
And I think Tori was coming back at you, well, I've got other things to do than worrying about your stuff, which is the women and her, or the women and her with the carpet sweepers.
Carpet sweepers, they were playing. There's music there now, which we'll have to find. We'll just talk a bit about the music, I suppose. What music did you use and why you used it?
I spent a lot of time trying to find the music, because sometimes you'll find music and go, oh, I could do this to it. But the one thing I wanted to maintain was what I call a kind of signature music that it wasn't like in, let's say, LM514, where I used the Rolling Stones, Brian Eno,
That's
this
right.
whole
Yes,
mixture.
Yes.
I wanted to come from one particular sort of music source, and I heard, I had Talking Heads, and I'd been listening to it, and then there were things like Burning Down the House, Oh, That Was the Day, and these songs started to make sense in terms of the work, and there were certain. Then I stumbled on David Byrne's composition for Twyla Tharp's Catherine Wheel.
Right. And David Byrne's the chief writer of Talking Heads.
And the other thing that was really worked for me for Talking Heads was that its richest component was percussion.
Oh, yeah.
The percussion is constantly in there, even with the water chimes. That has a percussion feeling, the striking of the chime bowls.
This is for the bowling section.
Yes.
Okay, which we'll get to in a minute. But I like to add here to Graeme, I suppose it's quite rare for choreographers in the sense that he, hold on, sorry, stop there. He's not afraid of any type of music. Now, a lot of choreographers are sort of directed towards using one type of music, but Graeme is quite happy with any sort of music. You've used very classical music, very modern music, you've got John Cage, etc., etc., etc. So the range of which you're sort of prepared to attack or to use any type of music, well, once again, this would have been quite groundbreaking too, to use this type of rock and roll. It wouldn't be the first time, of course, I shouldn't say that, but it was still quite challenging in how you're quite happy to use any type of music if it suited the vision you had for the piece.
And if the commonality of thought, you know, you go, oh, right, I can relate to that composer's work or that particular song.
I'll just go back a bit because we've lost. I'll just go back to, obviously, sorry. So that's, what is this section? I'll just see, I'm sorry. Is that Vanessa?
Yeah, Vanessa comes out, and it's a sequence with where you have an encounter.
Basically, I'm on the job. I've gone to work, and whilst the other women are behind dancing.
Yes, so it's and it's kind of no, Vanessa's like her pre-work process.
Oh, okay.
Pre-work before she comes out in what Vanessa calls the Minnie Mouse or Daisy Duck office outfit.
Okay, so you're saying Vanessa here is actually, is this her dream? Or is this, because she's dancing with me,
yeah.
You're saying we're not really in the office yet. So
no, it's almost like doubling up on the notion of you possibly having an encounter in a social scene.
Okay.
And
so this is like a foreshadowing.
Yeah, so you can turn it, you don't have to do something chronologically like in film. So you can go, oh, right, they've developed this kind of relationship within a social situation. Right. People from the office going down to the pub and so forth. And within that sequence, it's quite sexual. Your interaction, the two of you with one another. But then there's that thing at the office where that desire could still be operating, but you can't touch. Right. You don't touch. You know.
Okay. So sublimated.
And in a way,
it's got underground.
The Vanessa towards the end of it just gives up on you. She walks from, exits from the stage, and it's like something was once said to me don't start something you can't finish.
So, what do you think her attitude to me is there?
Oh, I think there's an attraction,
Right.
but it's also flirtatious.
Right.
That was an important.
It's not dangerous in the sense.
No,
It's
no.
quite
It's just
flirting, but
flirting,
not.
and it's one of those problems that still exists, particularly when women flirt. They think they're giving permission to go even further than that flirtation.
Right.
So in a way, she's being flirtatious.
Right.
But your imagination,
Goes
I didn't
further.
set that for you. You just interpreted it the way you needed
Right.
to interpret the choreography as I set it.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing I when I viewed it after all those years, I didn't realise how complex and intense the choreography is.
Okay.
It's rhythmically the changes of direction that I think a major signature in it. The dancer's going this way, and suddenly it's
I know. It's interesting looking at this now because it has got a slight ballroom feel to it, hasn't it?
That was quite kind of part of my heritage, and whenever it came to partnering work, ballroom, the smoothness of ballroom often came into it.
And this, what we're looking at here, I guess, is a combination of ballroom plus, I guess you could say, a bit of rap dancing.
Yeah, it was a whole conglomerate of probably an accumulation of my dance experiences up to that time and as a choreographer.
Right. Now, we'll talk about, I just, so you have these two stories going on. There's Vanessa dancing as the office, the secretary, and certainly free in a way, while the other women, her three there, are, I guess you could say, concerned with domestic issues.
Yes, yep. And that's where I think maybe Alan Bishop might have got confused the way you were back with, you start off with these women cleaning, and that seems to disappear, but then it comes back again. It's like, and in a way, yes, and that's when you now have Victoria coming back into the scene.
Right. And she's obviously highlighted here with a brighter coloured outfit than the other ladies. Let's keep going.
And this
Have I come home from work? Or
No. You're still.
Oh, I'm still dressing up.
You're getting ready to go.
Office. Yeah. Exactly.
So it's suggesting that earlier one was suggesting somewhere where you've had a social encounter with Vanessa.
Right.
But here you're actually getting ready to go.
And hence all this domestic stuff about watches and ties and all that stuff.
Tie.
And because there was Victoria expecting a kiss, was she? Is that right?
Yep.
I'm looking at that now, thinking that's what must have happened. So, a lot of stillness, a lot of
just
come back in again.
Yeah, other sections where the dancers just stop, and one dancer might just do one little motif.
Mm-hmm. So what's happening here? Oh, this is
the domestic frustration.
Domestic frustration. But the language looking like, I suppose, she's a sort of, some of the vocabulary could say would be washing the dishes, domestic things, but then once again amplified. So
and also a kind of frustration. Because you'll see it later when she takes off her clothes down to.
Oh yes. Okay.
And there's
so the language here is very modern, isn't it? I mean, the vocabulary is very modern, and once again you've got sort of ideations of domestic things, and I guess you could sort of say there's a bit of a TV ad look there going on.
Yeah, but it's also a reflection on films of particularly Fred Astaire, where he would take a kind of everyday domestic situation and then turn it into this amazing dance. So it's
Okay. And there's a sort of a bit of a headbanger thing going there too. That sort of, it's a bit, yeah, that sort of hardness.
yeah, and military,
military.
you know, like that the domestication requires, and it's almost again creating slightly robotic.
Yes.
And trying to break out of that. So the idea was to have sometimes very fluid, free movement, and then these staccato.
I've got to say here, you know, people love dancing this stuff because the language is very voluptuous. It's very, very enjoyable to do, and it's, I guess, unlike some dance, which is much more attempting to do these huge things like arabesque or jumps,
Yeah,
things
and
like that.
and
It's
also-
very, very particular, isn't it? It's very, you can
And
almost
it
say
is-
idiosyncratic.
A desire to show some sort of exquisite sculptural design, and what I was concerned with was finding a balance there, but also just movement.
Yeah, just activity. So it's a lot of very combination of classical and modern dance, plus a lot of domestic language.
Yeah.
And like I say, I get a sense of a bit of a TV ad thing going on there. The idea of the Superman
Yeah, and also
mixing the cake.
working around into kind of ritual, like this, going into a circle, and maybe a bit of AGL Lip Fine commercial.
Well, you see, that's an
came
interesting
out
point.
into
That's
that,
an interesting
yeah.
point because that's what I'm feeling there. And I mean, I can't remember that at the time because this is 37 years ago we're talking about. So, but just on looking at that now, I can see that deliberate demonstration of that sort of.
Well, I don't know if it's a deliberate demonstrate. I think it just gets ingrained into you, and it comes
Yes.
out. And
Because you choreograph very, very instinctively, don't you? You
Yes.
just do stuff, and then we used to copy it, and then you then, I guess, you'd
let you play with it.
let us play with it.
And also,
Not much. Would you sort of try and corral it too much, or you let the dancers just do the stuff?
no, let them do the stuff. And the other thing, I don't know if you remember, I didn't choreograph to counts. I'd go da dee da ba da da dee da 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 da, and then I put on the music and go 1, 2, 3, 4, and the dancers did it. So they weren't consciously thinking, "Oh, I've got to do this on
The
2."
seventh count, the third count, yeah.
So it gave, I think, a feeling of kind of a liberation.
Well, you can see here there's a lot of individual interpretation there too, isn't it? There's not a sense of they must all be together, obviously.
No,
They're
and
on the same page, but they're
yeah,
not.
and the only time hinted towards them being together if I wanted some sort of severe conformity,
Right.
and I didn't always consciously just say that. I'd just go, okay, I'll set the choreo in such a way that they'll all have to kind of do it that way. But it's still important throughout the work that the dancers have this freedom of interpretation. And I've known choreographers, and I've actually had to dance for choreographers, where they forget that the final choreographic process is performance. So you get a choreographer going, rehearsing and rehearsing and rehearsing till they're absolutely killed an open space for the audience to participate in the work.
Yes. No,
And-
we've
and-
seen that so often, isn't it? I guess you just iron out all the idiosyncrasy at all. All the interpretation gets ironed out. And I guess there's another thing too, which you never suffered from, but I've worked with a lot of guys who'd never really let you own the piece.
Oh no, I don't own.
See, but they won't. They'll just say, no, you haven't quite got what I want.
Oh,
You haven't
right,
quite-"
yeah.
But at a certain moment, they can say, well, actually, this is yours now. I don't
Yeah.
own it. And of course, if you keep hold of it, it never belongs to the dancer.
Yeah.
Because it belongs to the dancer, you can tell that, obviously.
Yeah.
So, but you're always very good at that. You let the dancer own
own it,
totally
but-
own the piece.
But the other thing is they have to have a feeling that the choreography is not owning them, that they actually, when I say in owning them, owning their body. No, they own their own body and they'll use it to maybe amplify or express some sort of idea that I'm trying to communicate. And the best times, and it happened with HaHa, that there was a commonality of sharing. It wasn't like, oh no, I don't agree with this from the point of view of a dancer, or I don't agree with the way you're interpreting my dance.
Well, I certainly think in this situation, if I remember the experience, it was all very, very, very enjoyable, really, and there was very little conflict about what your interpretation or our interpretation or our takeaway might be. I'm not sure if that happens all the time, but certainly in that context of this piece, it was a very, very calm process, I thought. I don't know how it compares to others, but
No, I always have a great respect for dancers, and rarely, I would say, in any of the works I've choreographed, there's then been any major conflict with dancers.
I guess that's that stems from your attitude, doesn't it? And the fact that you're allowing the dancer to have their own interpretation, their own ownership of the experience. And so many times as I've worked with Graeme over the years, he would demonstrate something in front of you and then you would do it. And even, I guess at that point, you could say you probably owned it. And you'd make some slight adjustments, but not many too much. And you wouldn't waste too much time on sort of trying to make the dancer conform to your expectations so much as you allowed them that.
Yeah, and the important thing was, as long as they were just honest in their performing it, that they were genuinely committed, and that they, I don't like to use the word opinion, but they had a sort of attitude towards it.
That's an interpretation of
that. And I remember, I'm not sure who it was in the cast of HaHa, and it was in a coffee shop or something like that. And she said to me, oh, you know this section that we do there, what's that about? And I said, I don't know. I actually don't know what it's about, but I know that it's about something. And she looked at me bewildered, and I said, and it might actually mean something to someone in the audience or to an audience, but you can't see it yet until it's performed. And then you go, oh, right,
well,
that's what it might have been about.
That's the audience's final, what should we say, completion of the experience.
Well, an audience, in my opinion, is 80% of the choreography.
Right. So you're talking space between as the audience watches, the act of watching is actually a form of choreography in itself.
Yeah. And it's also, if they are actually really engaged in it, the dancers aren't going to miss that. They're going to feel it.
Well, yes, that's something we talk a lot in our work too, is this idea that you can actually proffer the audience an experience, and then you can actually read and respond to the audience's reaction to that experience. So, and I think that's what performance really is, isn't it? The nature, you have a sort of native offering, and then there's a response to that offering, and you can actually dance to the response.
Yes, and it's a conversation.
And that's instinctive, because you can't say what it is. It's actually
it's just felt.
It's a felt thing, exactly. And so much of dancing's feel. Yes, what's interesting is because a lot of people think, well, see, this comes to this other thing. You've got a demand. You say, here's the steps. But then, of course, once you give that demand, you've got to say, well, you've still got to make it your own.
Yeah.
You can't, otherwise you're an automaton, you're a robot. And, of course, you can't be a robot anyway because we're all human beings. And so this idea should be you make an offering. Graeme would create a structure, I suppose, a temporal, spatial construction, time and space, rhythm. And then we would actually then do our version of it. And of course, as a intelligent choreographer, you go, okay, I'm going to watch so-and-so do this thing. You go, okay, wow, I didn't think you could do it like that. So you walk away as a choreographer thinking, oh, okay, now I've got another image of what I can do too. So you've taken the experience that they've bounced back at you, haven't you? I mean, I think that would be the smartest way to...
And the other thing is that sometimes when you've got a second cast, and the first cast or people in particular roles have the capacity then to actually look at another interpretation, and sometimes the dancer can get an idea and go, oh right, never thought of that approach. That is interesting, and it's not imitating that dancer's movement or how they interpret it. It's just where the emphasis has suddenly been put.
And the individuation. I mean, this person, I'm a certain age, a certain experience, a certain physical attitude, a certain physical way of doing stuff. With someone like Mark Baldwin, who in some ways is quite a balance to what I am, because he's a very different dance personality, and we'll see him coming on in a second. He's an extraordinary dancer in his own way. So I'd look at someone like Mark and go, wow, I wish I could look a bit like that or something, and he might look the same way to me. And of course, that would broaden our library of experience, wouldn't it? That would give us a sort of a physical system of knowledge, so you say a knowledge stack or talent stack, which you could then draw on instinctively at other times. And that was very important to sort of be able to read that. And I guess I'd have to applaud your ability to look at people. What could this person do? I'm going to use that rather than try and make them into the thing I think they should be.
Yeah, and it's another thing I once said to Kate Champion, which impacted on her, that some of the most interesting aspects of a dancer is their limitations.
What they can't do.
You can explore their limitations, and that's not like because within those limitations and what you might call imperfections is part of who they are as a person.
Exactly. Well, but I should digress a bit. But someone like Julia Blakey, who was the ballet master with this girl, she's an incredible dancer. She had phenomenal limitations, but one of the best dancers I've ever seen. And Alan Israel was another one too.
Yes, yeah.
A lot of limitations, but they actually made them more interesting. So that's there's a whole other story there, which we don't intend to go into. But that's a very good point, to understand human fallibility, really, because that's what it means, fallibility becoming something you can amplify.
Yeah. And
that becomes actually individuation, doesn't it? Because that person's... Mark could never look like me, and neither could I ever look like Mark. And so... And I guess this is something else I want to talk about, I suppose, because this is a dance piece where you can see a lot of individuation. These aren't automatons, and even the difference between, say, Tori and Jackie Murphy, there's a lot of allowance there for people's individuation, which you don't see so much these days. You see a bunch of dancers who are all sort of the same.
Homogenised.
Just homogenised, yeah, exactly, generic. And one of the good things about this type of situation is the audience got a chance to see a lot of different character on stage, different character, not just personality, but character.
Yeah.
And this is a piece where Graeme's vocabulary allowed that characteristic to be amplified or projected. So this is you're talking, I think Tori's here. Tori's playing my wife. She's taken to take her clothes off. What's the thing here, do you think?
It's basically ridding herself of this domestic uniform.
Right.
You know, that trying to get rid of, whereas the others, as basically being quite explicit with their...
Oh, right. Yes.
The women picked up on it. They only had to look at me and that whole thing of and see she gets further and further down and just trying to cleanse the body of
memory,
or just I want to free my body up and it's still I can still feel like the skin's still holding it, but then
and of course the women around her sort of obviously tidying up stuff as well, but really acting as this type of swirling energy around her.
And it worked well in terms of that's what domestics do. If clothes are dropped on the floor, you're sweeping and go, and you just pick up the the clothes and keep working while you're holding, some undies or a sock or.
Right, now here we have the women have exited, and we've got, are these surfers? What are they? Surf life-saving?
Oh, yeah,
members?
it was a complete
So people,
play on what was still relevant, even I think in the 80s and prior to that, was one of the iconic notions of the Australian male was the lifesaver.
right.
And there's a bit of a peculiar thought I had there, and I didn't mention it. Was here are these lifesavers that have come out to save her from this stop, and so, but also that whole thing of her discreet idea of actually feeling that she's actually attractive to these men.
Okay.
That these men have.
So she's
fun.
on stage. We can't see very clearly.
Yeah,
she's
she's
on
down.
stage. She hasn't exited with the other men. We've
Yeah.
got Peter Wells,
Yep.
John Salisbury, and Mark Yaton.
Yeah.
Okay, as the three. He hesitated to use the word cliche, but you could say archetypes.
Yes.
In some ways,
Yes.
if you talk about Australian archetypes, this surf life-saving male is, and of course this whole sense
And
of
that's
rescue.
where Vanessa put them in the Bondi Lifesavers.
Bondi lifesavers, exactly.
The yellow and the.
The yellow and the red caps. So they're doing, and anything about the language there particularly?
No, it was just show prowess in movement
Well,
and
okay, just a
you
lot
know,
of skill there, obviously,
yeah.
because these dancers really are can do stuff. So one of the things about Graeme's work, I suppose, is just the enjoyment of the actual dancing itself, and how it's a very, well, I guess you could, I would always say it's easy. It is easy to do. It's enjoyable to do. It's got facility, and you're not too caught up in explicit skills.
Yeah, and the thing is,
That's Peter Wells there
Yes.
with Tory.
and the thing is that, in fact, a lot of the choreography in HaHa is technically demanding, particularly from a rhythmic point of view, but the whole important thing is that for an audience it never looks difficult.
Yes. It doesn't look like circus. Like,
Yeah,
look,
and
it's
it-
fantastic.
Yeah, and I wanted it to be like someone just having a casual conversation. No, yeah.
Okay.
So rather than, but technically, I would challenge, looking at that, because of now the way dancers are trained, I would challenge dancers who have graduated in recent years, because some of the dancers there just graduated.
Yeah, Mark was his first job, I think.
And
out of
Sue
Ballet School.
Peacock.
Sue Peacock. Where'd she come from? Where'd she come from? Ask him, where'd she train?
Perth.
Perth, that's
Perth.
right, yes.
And she studied at the Centre for the Performing Arts in Adelaide.
Oh, is that, okay, yes, she did too. So that was her first job, probably.
Yeah,
Mark
yeah.
was straight out of the Australian Ballet School. He's the young blonde man.
Yeah, but I think if you were to go, okay, to a newer generation and say, okay, we're going to remount this on you, I think some of it they would find difficult,
Why do you think?
because it looks at times, as I said, improvisers are very casual, and I don't think they're trained to that point of having that sense of casuality, just like
Okay.
being not what Jimmy True would call posturing within the movement. And there's no, in HaHa, there's very little posturing in the movement. It like, even when the dancers stop, it's not like they're going
That's right.
They're in the moment. It's just
Yes,
there.
suspension of time
Yeah.
or something. I guess the other thing is you could look at Peter Wells is a phenomenal dancer, and John Salisbury. They're three quite different dancers, aren't they? And yet you don't get a sense that one's, better than the others, do you? They seem to sort of weld themselves together, so they're not.
Yeah, well, they do it with their, as I said, within their limitations.
Yeah, exactly.
That,
Yeah.
and sometimes great dancers who might have an extreme facility, sometimes for the overall balance of the choreography, have to draw back a bit.
Yeah.
But they'll still test. They can still have the stakes up a little bit for the other dancer to draw them up
Yes.
a little bit. But
Yeah.
this coming down and being drawn up.
For the team, so to speak.
Yeah.
Teamwork,
Yeah.
as in a captain, helping the weaker members of the team,
Yeah.
etc., etc., etc. Okay. Now, Vanessa's just rolled up again.
Yes.
So they've all disappeared. Tori gone? Oh yeah, they're exiting now. So here's Vanessa, looking extremely. What was the thing? There's a sort of a sharpness to her. The way she does the secretary.
It's
Disdain.
I remember making a comment. It might have been her dance style. Was to I just said cut space. So cutting space is that if you made a movement that would go from here to here, you went there. So you're cutting the rhythm. So
Okay.
where it looked like it was going to
Go to there.
you
stop
actually
it there.
suspend it. And I suppose the one person who was famous as a performer was Michael Jackson. Was doing it all the time. Cut.
Yes, that's right.
And you go,
Interruption.
oh,
Yeah, self-interdiction is
Yeah.
it? If I'm going, I didn't do that. So, I guess this is the dream sequences. Would you call this the Jimmy Carter moment? I have lust in my heart.
yes, definitely.
So this is, and Vanessa's been quite, it's not disdainful, but quite sharp and quite challenging.
Yeah, but it was also that whole bump you away. Don't get too close. This is my territory. And the whole.
He's trying to pretend that he's concentrating,
Yeah.
or so he's dictating a letter, I guess, and this is the summation. And yet he's obviously, what's the word, susceptible to this.
Yeah, she's
this
trying to
attractive-
be professional, and you're trying to be professional, but
Finding it hard.
all these thoughts go.
And this is, I guess, my signature solo in the piece.
Yes, yeah.
Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, it's about frustration, about anxiety, where desire can sometimes be unbearable.
Right.
So it's like, and sometimes
Caught between.
you can, but you also can be in a situation where
Slow mo. Just do this
It's
slowly
a-
while we talk about it.
it's only going to take that to cross over
Right.
for something.
Go too far.
Yeah.
All you have to do is to blurt.
So it's that
blurt.
restraining, expressing a sort of frustration as well as
So this,
a desire.
right. So we've taken, and this has moved off stage. In fact, this
Yes.
is my solo, really, as in the solo. Actually, something I'd like to talk about here, I suppose, which was interesting, because I can't, did you, I can't remember how it all happened. Did you give me all those steps? Or
Yeah, yeah.
So you actually choreographed all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And I just
And I
copied-
just said, so I remember we got to the end of the duet content with Vanessa. She made the exit, had played the music up until that point, and then I just choreographed.
Right. So you set all of those steps,
Yeah,
and then I did them my
and then
way.
I just said, okay, you start there, and it's going to finish here,
Right.
and you work the interpretation of that.
Right. What was quite interesting for me, because this is a great lesson in dancing in a way, because I did it all, and it required actually a very delicate touch, didn't it? Because you
Yeah.
couldn't really do anything fully, because it did. So it actually was all actually touched upon, wasn't it? Every gesture was only really, it wasn't really articulated. It wasn't
No,
sort of cutting the space.
well, it's uncertainty.
Uncertainty.
Yeah.
And I did it, and of course it felt really good. And then I tried to put more stuff into it. I don't remember this sequence, but I just sort of tried to sort of do it harder and bigger. And actually, people's reactions were, oh, it's not quite as good as it was. I'm not sure what you said, but
Yeah.
certainly other dancers thought, oh, it's not as good as it was before. And I thought, okay, I have to pull back on this super big time and really not do it properly and just throw it away in some ways.
Well, it's actually part of the choreography comes from my background of studying acting with Brian Siren. And he said Brian Siren would say to you, as an actor, you work towards 80%. You don't give 100% because you've given no room to your audience and you've given no room to yourself within the performance.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go bang 100%, you've got nowhere to go.
Nowhere to go, yeah.
And as he said, you fall over.
Yeah.
You fall over. So part of that solo was
And I felt I just, actually, once I worked out the attitude to it, of course, it was actually quite easy. And I just sort of I mean, I suppose you could say I gestured to it rather than probably did it fully. There's a whole series of holding back, restraint, wasn't there? Which, of course, as well worked. This is true for any situation, but certainly works well in a situation like that where you're looking for something that's hesitant and unconsummated.
Yeah, almost like you're dealing with an opaque movement, if I can use that word.
Opaque, beautiful word.
Opaque, that you can't quite see through the...
Yes, and that, I guess, also allows the audience to provide their own clarity.
Yes.
Because they can actually clear it up for themselves, or you ask him. I'm not saying that everyone in the audience does it, but it does allow the audience space in which to have their own interpretation rather than you sort of bombarding them. And this is what happens a lot in dance today, or in any art. You just clobbered by this stuff, throwing it in the... And you've got no equation. There's no sort of part, you can't be part of the equation. It's the feng shui if actually blocks you out of the experience, doesn't it?
Well, it's but an interesting point about you talking about that solo, a thing that came about was that Michael Waits was going to uni. He saw HaHa, he saw how the men were dancing in your solo, and he thought, I want to do that.
Really?
So he just gave up his uni and went to the Centre for the Performing Arts in Adelaide.
Wow.
And then the weirdest thing was the first work that was ever choreographed on him was in Townsville. That was his first professional job. And I did Lunar Sunrise, and he was in Lunar Sunrise. But it wasn't until so many years later he said, oh, I couldn't believe that I saw your work. It inspired me to become a dancer. And then you ended up choreographing on me in my first professional job. The thing is, I think it broke down a conceived idea of how dance should be performed.
Mm-hmm. And I guess in a piece like this, where you see my dancing, which is very, very idiosyncratic. We're talking about James Cagney, weren't we?
Yeah.
Bit James Cagney in that. And also then Mark Baldwin. So you saw this range, rather than these sort of models about how you should do stuff, you saw, right, these guys are dancing and they're having a good time, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I've had that said about me other times. Ian Castanero said the same sort of thing about something he saw me do, and thought, oh, well, I can do that.
Yeah.
Because there's no sort of, I mean, it's obviously skill there, but it's not skill that's beyond anybody. It actually shows you that dance can be about expressing what you are rather than trying to be an ideal.
Yeah. And then there's no ideal dancer, and that's the beauty of dance. There's no, even when you might look at the most, look at someone like a Baryshnikov. there's still problems with Baryshnikov's dancing. It's hammy. You can, if you honestly sit there, you can go, oh, you go, look, I'm dancing. Whereas I think with this form of dance, it's not saying, oh, look, I'm dancing. It's like I'm dancing about something.
Yes.
So it transcends what I call the personal ego.
Okay. Good way to put it. Very good way to put it. And I guess you could say you're occupying what you're doing. You're involved in what you're doing rather than presenting something. You're actually inside it rather than sort of portraying or trying to project something. Which is very different, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's the other thing I learnt from Jimmy Truitt, and it's in there, is for the dancers to actually be like sponges. So the audience feels like they're being drawn into the dancer's body.
Very different thing, isn't it, from projection?
Yeah,
this idea of involving and inviting them in. Obviously, James Truitt, he's one of the names you've mentioned more than anybody else, probably. Obviously, very powerful influence on you. How much time did you actually ever spend with Jimmy Truitt?
Oh, in terms of classes, particularly in New York, I would do, because I really wanted to understand the technique, I'd do an elementary, an intermediate and an advanced Horton class. And that was usually around 2 of those one day, 3 of them another day.
And how long was that for?
That was for 6 months.
6 months. So you met him in Australia, and studied with him in Australia, and then decided to go to New York to study with him?
Yes.
Specifically?
Specifically.
And of course you had an entree in the sense that he knew you and he was fond of you. And so that was the 6 months. What year was that?
That was 1971.
71, okay. And was that the only time you spent with him?
Yep, and did correspondence, did write over a number of years. And I thought the interesting thing was I never imagined that I would work with Anna Sokolov, but he had spoken about Anna Sokolov because he'd danced in Anna Sokolov works, Deserts and what was it called?
Rooms?
Rooms.
Rooms.
Yeah, rooms.
Right. But I guess the other thing to talk about, James, we can get on to Sokolov before, but that's another time. But the thing about Jimmy Truitt, obviously he made a big difference to you in terms of teaching you how to dance, but he must have also taught you about aesthetic.
Well, that's, yes,
ways.
He did. And he talked, that's where he introduced me to the Paul Klee works. Right. He organised to go and see the New York City Ballet and would talk about the actual dancing, how the dancers performed. He could be quite critical and say, oh, such and such. He said probably 70% of dancers in the world are not musical or rhythmic literate. That they'll just square dancing. Square dancing.
Exactly. No.
But he would just give me an example of him saying, okay, as a dancer, you got 4/4 times. So you go, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. But as a dancer, you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and in fact split the offbeat and give it but you're still in time. And then you can do that.
Well, that's, I guess you could say that's putting your own time on the time.
Yes, yeah, and therefore, as he would say, you actually kind of go through the music, and you don't. And that's a term I don't know if you've ever heard of it. I only heard it in America. You're not doing a Mickey Mouse. And Mickey Mousing was that if you saw a Mickey Mouse cartoon, as he put it, and Mickey Mouse went like this, it'd go boom, dun, all these percussion, all these sounds happening wherever a certain movement went. So,
and the visuals are just a complete copy of the sound, isn't it?
Yeah, but in HaHa, there's quite large areas within it where the music is just moving through a rhythmic structure that the dancers are doing.
So it's a landscape.
Yep. So it's, but an audience sitting there will go, they'll hear that thing in the music and put it to that dancer's movement rather than the dancer looking like they're actually specifically doing that movement to that sound moment.
Okay, that's an interesting thing. Audience making is completing the choreography, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that's particularly due to the fact that the dancer is not too explicit.
Yeah, because the thing is, why go along and watch dance if, how can I put it, if the dancer's going to do it all for you?
Yes.
It's going to explicitly, and that's the thing I talked about the other day, illustrate. You know, almost to that point of pantomime.
Yes.
You know, that of, I'm going to dance, or...
Well, I think it starts to become more like circles or something. It's just presentational, isn't it? There's no occupation. There's no... you have a demand, and then if you're just doing the demand, there's none of yourself in there.
Yeah, no. And the thing is, you have a right within a work as a dancer to basically make demands of yourself, but also make demands of the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And Anna Sokolov gave me a great image. She said, well, when you perform, you have to imagine that you have an open wound here. So you can let your audience in.
Mm-hmm.
And there will be an audience that is frightened too, because you might be confronting. There might be an audience that comes in, and when they go in, they're giving off a very direct response, and it might actually close up the wound, or it may make it burn and worse.
Yes.
So
that's a very interesting attitude to what performance is, isn't it? Irrespective of the thing you're performing, whether it might be how you concerto. You can still see those things, aren't they? Because that's your duty as a performer to yourself in relationship to yourself and the soul of the audience. Isn't it? That's very true. And it's not something you can prove. These aren't truths. It's not science.
No, that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
It transcends theory, or you can have a theory about it, but there are no apparatus to actually prove it.
Exactly.
And that's why the dance will keep on going.
That's right, and that's that mysterious content. Anyway, back to this. So I've had my little solo, and Vanessa's come back on stage, and we're resuming the office.
Yep.
Oh, and is this the Belmondo section? Remember the one with the cigarette? Right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So what's this about? This is the three men through.
It's basically a reflection of the conflict.
Right.
It's almost like a Greek chorus.
Okay.
And
so the women are doing language from the
using the carpet sweepers, and
so this is a trick.
And this is where it then turns into a kind of social. Later on, if I remember that was the day.
Disco sequence, so to speak. All right. So we're sort of recapitulating some of the language we saw before. Stop.
Yeah, and then sometimes, but but I put the motif into a different context.
Right.
So it's like, what's it like having a cup of coffee at home compared to having a cup of coffee in a cafe, compared to having a cup of coffee at a friend's place.
Right.
They're in a different context, and that simple act is different.
Right.
You can't, you'll drink that coffee when you're sitting with a friend at home in a different way than if you were in a cafe or a public place.
Okay. So domestic activities personal activity when put in a different situation will give have a different attitude.
Yes.
So once again, very bright costumes.
Yep.
They've all moved up stage.
Yes.
And
there's, I think in this sequence where there's a notion of, and this is like where you have to look at time working, that you actually have, Tori's been off doing that whole swimming thing.
right.
But if I remember right, she's going to come through with a towel on her head. I don't know if you remember walking across the diagonal through.
So speed this up a little bit. Lighting change. How much do you remember of this?
Highlight moments, but not all of it. I knew how it worked sequentially.
Remember that?
Yeah. And the bowls.
But those are such graphic images, I guess, that you could forget those. I mean, here's Tori.
Yes.
She's in a lady bowler's outfit.
This is where we're coming up to the bowling.
Bowling sequence. Which is very
Well, it was actually, but I didn't tell. It was actually for me tennis.
Was it?
So it was like you did the bowls and she did the tennis.
So she's playing tennis.
Because tennis, I remember within suburbia, particularly more upper class suburbia, housewives that had their, once a week game of tennis.
That's right. So here I'll come on. This reminds me a lot of Nijinsky's shirt, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's one of the most beautiful photos from Nijinsky is where I think he's doing his sleeves up just like that. And I think I thought of that because I love that. And it's a very beautiful image, actually, because it's very soft too, isn't it? The whole bowling thing.
Well, it's moved from the formalism of the office to something a little bit more casual, and the whole thing of bringing how can I put it, the whiteness into it. But it was also the thing that interested me was in terms of suburbia, more and more young men in the 80s were starting to play lawn bowls.
Right.
And now it's really matured, so you've got 18-year-olds now.
Yes. Now, and I guess you get this sense of dissociation. She's got her world, I've got my world, and that's a dimorphism, say.
But it's also, which I, again, not giving notes, it's a seduction scene.
Right.
It's a form of seduction in contrast to the situation with Vanessa and the secretary, because you know one another and you're married. And my contention was it's very difficult to be seductive if you've already kind of gone through motions and so courting and so forth.
Right.
So it's like trying to bring it back again.
Because what's interesting, I suppose, you we're looking at this image of myself on one side and Tori on the other, and you can see it as separation, but you're saying you think it as actually a type of consanguinity, of joining.
Yeah, well, what happens with seduction is the notion of getting closer and closer and closer and closer. And you see it played out in films all the time, in like on a beach or in a bar, someone's over there, someone's here.
Eyes across the room.
How do you get, oh right, even though I've got a full beer here, I'll go and buy another beer because this woman might be at the bar about to, that
Yes.
kind of. So the distance, and that was a personal thing because of something I'd gone through in my life, wanting something to come back together again.
Okay.
That something had been lost, there'd been a rift, but you kind of passionately hoped that it could all
Right.
return. And
So you say there's a desire on your part when you look at this thing or when you construct this thing of actually coming together, even though what we're looking at is actual spatial separation.
but in the work, yes, that's like saying, oh, here we are,
Right.
but you'll notice you'll actually come together.
Yes. Oh, there we are. And in fact, this is the moment here. But she stopped, and he did this. Like, I'll never forget this. This gesture. This.
Well, it's that whole thing of, when you, in bowls, when they,
Chivvy the ball.
but they sort of do
Clapping
this.
the ball along. Very beautiful. I guess in a sense it's interesting too, because you've got this, in terms of design, you've got that sort of bouncy skirt in the tennis and the activity and the buoyancy of that compared to, I guess, the quiet gravity of the male figure.
And also,
That's right. Is that my... See,
this is...
I'm wiping her face.
You actually had a red... you've got your red cloth
Yeah.
that you would...
Ball polishing cloth.
Yeah. And
That's the sniffing
I
thing. No? Was it the sniffing? That's the sniffing thing we're looking
yeah,
at?
yeah. And the thing was, Vanessa said, make it red, because, as I described what the duet was about, she said, well, it's about passion, isn't it?
Yeah.
I said, yeah. So she said, oh, it's got to be red, it can't be some sort of brown or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. Red blood. I remember that's this. Claire, but Claire was the first customer. She hurt herself, you say?
Yes, hurt her ankle.
Right. But did you do it?
Claire Stonier.
Claire Stony, yes,
Yeah.
yes. I've forgotten this thing. And so it also looks as though it's in slow motion too, does it? Would you say?
Yeah, it's supposed to be suspended like that. And it's like coming together, separating, that there's still that tension of separation, and you come together again,
Yeah.
and it's not, well, no, that's not working.
Right.
that. But it was also that when you separate, it's like your own personal feelings, and that's the one of the few sections in the work, I think, where the dancers went into the thought.
Yes, it's true. So, could you say anything about this movement here? I mean, to me, it's a bit like a Graeme move. And any...
I know. No, I was basically looking at just nervousness.
Right. Difference. Forgotten all this, I must admit.
The quality in this duet goes back a little bit to what you were saying before, the notion of ballroom dancing, the
Mm-hmm.
fluidity of ballroom dancing.
Mm-hmm.
That
And the
you-
partnership,
Yeah.
the continuous touching, but also this, the touching's quite restrained and formalized,
Yes.
isn't it?
So this is where I was talking earlier, like if looking at what you and Tori are doing here, is having a sense of grace to it.
Yes, I mean, you're quite right
You
that
know.
I hadn't thought about it directly as that, but it is very gracious, isn't it? It's full of grace.
Mm.
And essentially it's got a lot of love in there too, affection.
Oh yeah,
hasn't
and
it?
it's as I said, slightly autobiographical, or a lot more autobiographical, but
But you say this about all your pieces, are they biographical? Are all your pieces biographical?
not all, but a lot of them are.
Okay.
And even Anna commented when she saw Random Harvest, she said, "Oh, you choreograph from a very personal experiences," and she said, "I don't think you should lose that."
Who said that?
Anna Sokolov.
Oh, and I saw, okay.
Yeah, when she saw Random Harvest.
Okay. Well, it's a very good thing to say. I suppose we all, you know, I mean, I could see this as autobiographical too, I suppose, in that context. So it's interesting, sort of,
Yeah.
did you use me because you could see myself?
No, not particularly. It's probably selfish of me just to go, okay, I'll do this on John and Tori as a representation of what Vanessa and I had been going through.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. I
Yeah,
suppose
yeah.
I don't think they disagree with what I just said. I think you saw, okay, this is...
And then you related to, because you can't impose your own personal life onto a dancer,
No.
if that makes sense. You can't go, oh, I was feeling this and this and this when I was with Vanessa, so I want you to feel this and this and this in this duet. You can't impose your personal history. You might be able to tell in the process of choreographing a personal story, but you can't be putting, in my opinion, the intimacy of your life onto a dancer,
Why not?
because they're not ever going to fully understand your intimacy. And so it doesn't do them credit and it doesn't do your heart.
Is it likely
credit.
to confuse them? Is it likely to sort of make them go, oh, gee, where are
Well,
they?
yeah, because they'll feel like that they have to, they're interpreting you and not interpreting
Themselves.
their feelings.
Yeah.
So with that duet, it was just, okay.
Because you never told us anything. I don't.
Well, no, I thought there was also, if I was to tell you anything about it, it would have turned into what I call a kind of a gossip,
Corrupted.
and it undermined the intimacy. So if you're going through a breakup like Vanessa and I went through, there's intimacy there. It's not. There can be public observations of it, but there's the intimacy that's really important. And yeah, you can't really totally share that with a dancer in a dance work.
No. And I guess the other thing is, I suppose you have this very personal trigger or impulse to sort of do something, but then it turns into something else, doesn't it? And I guess you could argue that you have a very personal situation going with somebody like your ex-wife, but when that's given to, say, myself and Tori, or some version of it's given to myself, then it becomes universal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's the thing that counts, is the universality of the thing, which of course is stemmed from a personal impulse, but then becomes...
and it doesn't become parochial,
yeah.
if that makes sense.
Well, it goes the opposite, doesn't it?
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying.
Archetypical.
If you go, oh, I want you, it's like one of the questionable things about film is when a film is made about the life of some particular person.
Like that with John.
Yeah, and so you have this actor trying to be, but where they sometimes get away with it is because of the whole iconic nature. So you're getting involved in the iconic aspects as well as the so-called private, personal. But it can't ever, you can't replicate it. Again, it's illustrating. Okay, we're going to illustrate this particular time, an event. And,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a very interesting thing. Sort of the personal becomes universal as it goes. And the dance is even more so, I suppose, because dance is unspoken stuff. It's instinctive or unconscious.
Yeah.
So it becomes ineffably more universal as it sort of leaves your body and becomes owned by the dancers. You've given them this thing, haven't you? Okay, so now we've got Mark Baldwin and Jackie Murphy. Mark's a tremendously colourful dancer, I suppose you could say.
Yeah. Flamboyant.
Very flamboyant, and I guess they're playing us two as young bride and groom. Is that right?
Yeah.
Call that?
Yeah. I kind of
both very well matched too. Mark's quite tall, and Jackie's tall.
I've got to say, I think it was a stroke of genius, because I said I want to do this wedding thing to Vanessa, and she said, okay, it's got to be plastic tails and top hat, and it's got to be totally ludicrous, because she said, that's basically, is that what you're saying about marriage now? I would become cynical, to be honest. So that's where I did a critique on.
Yes. It also reminds me of Jeffrey Holder in Live and Let Die, the African American had a white half face.
Oh, right.
Baron Sandys. There's sort of a voodoo aspect to this too, isn't it? There's sort of the fake top hat, or the ludicrous top hat made out of something that top hats aren't made of.
Yeah.
So that gives it quite an interesting demonic thing, and the way they do it, of course, with this sort of send up, this over the topness. I guess they're going through their marriage vows, and both Jackie and Mark were quite easily do melodrama, couldn't they? So this is one of the most interesting, and of course the comparison between their energy or vigour, the expansive, extravagant nature, and our more sedate. Would you place the age of Tori as any particular age?
No.
They've been married for how long?
I didn't even look at how long. It was just you're married, and it's not about like you'd have couples like together for 7 years and then they get married. That getting married becomes another different idea of time.
Right.
It's about a conformist commitment, and we saw that with the debate about same-sex marriage.
Formality.
Yeah, the formality and
as a public event.
Yeah.
So this is interesting, isn't it? What do you think is going on there?
Oh, it's just basically you're captives of convention and what is supposedly expected of a married couple.
Right.
And
so Mark's pants have fallen down, and what did that mean?
Just foolishness, clowning.
Right. I guess
like,
what's interesting, I suppose, is you think that dropping the pants, is that something you said to Brian? Oh, Mark, do you drop your pants now, or did it just sort of happen? And you
No, I told him just drop
So
your pants. And maybe it could have been something very practical, how to get him off stage.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because this is a lesson in choreography in some ways, because that sort of interdictive gesture, things are going on fine, and suddenly pants fall. Oh, everything changes. He can't do stuff anymore. Maybe he goes off stage because he's nervous. There's all these other manifestations, depth of fields, aren't they?
Well, and that's hopefully for the audience to make their choices about that
Exactly.
relative to their
Yeah, so
experiences.
you've actually, I think you've just thrown a mystery into the thing, and the mystery has to be resolved by the audience, or doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
They can resolve it in the way they however they fashion, and that's an interesting point, is it? Whether you sort of put these, I would call interdictive gesture, I guess, something that's against the continuum, it interrupts the continuum. It's like you were saying, cutting the space.
Well, the thing is also without, this is out of respect for Vanessa, our relationship came to an end like that.
Okay.
It was like absolute sever, a sudden event, and we're no longer together.
Right.
So maybe there's that notion of...
But once again, this idea of the personal sort of trigger or impulse, then once through the agency of choreographing on another person, another couple, it's quite separate from you, that it becomes a universal archetype or something, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's classic...
Universalises in the transfer
yeah.
of the impulse to the activization
Yeah.
by this other couple on stage.
Yeah, well, it's a, I suppose, classic Joseph Campbell notions of archetype, and that an archetype does not necessarily have to be a directly visual image.
But that's the point. Is
Yeah.
that this ambiguity or
Yeah,
plurality
yeah.
is very important, because if it's direct, it becomes something that's didactic, and the audience is faced with a fait accompli.
Yeah.
And there's no completion, isn't it? It's interesting. So here's Tori on stage on her own. Anything to say about this?
No, it's really, I suppose, frustration and a bewilderment and
Okay, so who's this? This is Sue Peacock.
yes,
What's she doing? Oh, it's the telephone.
yes.
Now, there's no sound for this, is there? Did you cut the sound out? Was there no music for this?
There was no music. It just,
Yeah. So, what was all that about? Well,
oh well, someone's at the office, so I'm going to be home late.
right. And of course, you don't know whether that's got dark connotations
Yeah,
or
yeah.
etc. Okay. Can I just ask? I can't remember if there's sound for this. Am I on the phone, or is it just no? It's just
It's no.
It's
Yeah,
silent.
yeah. If I remember right, it was just okay. Yeah, no.
okay. Once again, an interruption to the whole sort of flow, and a sort of quite a surprising event. You know, telephones being pretty.
And I think the thing that was a challenge in terms of the work was those shifts from time and space not necessarily being chronological. So we've seen you way back with Vanessa McIntosh, but then we've seen you in another kind of scenario, but it's not necessarily going, oh, well, you were with Vanessa and then you went off and you played bowls, or it's looking at
This is the What a Night, is it?
Yes.
What it was. So this is that disco sequence or a social?
yeah.
This is the thing. So this is just a bunch of people at a party. Is this to do with that club you saw in Launceston?
Yeah.
This is what stimulated that.
Yeah.
And I think I come on with Vanessa and do the same. In fact, I'm with Vanessa.
Yeah, you're with Vanessa.
And is this the same stuff I was doing with her before, or?
No, it's a different. There's a different quality to it. There's
Right.
a different.
And all the other guys are sort of
Distance thing.
interacting together,
Yeah.
aren't they? And they're sort of coupling and uncoupling, so to speak. Is that, who's that? Is that Tori?
Oh, I can't really see, to be quite honest. No, that's Vanessa, if I remember
Is
rightly.
that? Oh, right. Oh, someone. No, that's Vanessa here.
Oh,
That's Vanessa there.
oh, it might be Tori.
I think
Sorry.
that's. You think that's Tori? Must be, I suppose. Or is it Sue Peacock? To me, it looks like Sue Peacock. Okay. And there's a lot of sort of interaction between all of us.
It's quite choreography is quite complex, rhythm wise.
Oh, yeah.
It's there's a lot of what I call catch rhythms in it.
Catch rhythm.
Catch
Catch
rhythms where you what kind of
Interruption.
dun.
And do you use that a lot in your?
Yeah, a catch rhythm actually originates back to tap dancing. You have a catch rhythm and you catch it.
Okay. That's Sue Peacock. So that is Sue.
Yes.
I guess this is panorama or sort of.
Well, we're getting close to the end of the work, if I remember rightly.
Is that,
And that's Tori going through,
that's Tori.
yep, with the towel.
Okay. Oh, right. She's in a bathrobe.
Yep.
So once again, you suspended all the activity.
So it's like she's somewhere else, sort of combining a weird film technique where you can cut from one location to the other. Very hard to do that in dance, so I just thought, okay, I'll just let the audience know that
Suspended.
Tori's
Yeah.
at home. She's just had a game of tennis or whatever, whatever the case may be. And there's this whole social event happening. So, phone call, I'm going to be late.
Oh, okay. That's one of the John Mondo stuff.
Yeah.
Where did that cigarette thing come from? Is that just some reference to a film?
No, not really. I don't just, sometimes
So it was-
things just come out of you and
So Tori's coming on again.
yep.
Oh, this is the old Monty Disco there. A lot of preening going on there. I guess
Yeah,
you could argue that's women in the restaurant
yeah.
doing their makeup and stuff like that. Then so. So how to do. What do you think's happening here? Just a sort of dream sequence inside
Yeah,
that.
and it's part of the work was to say this is not unique to just this couple.
Okay.
That it's there are whole permutations.
And I guess you'd say Vanessa and myself are metaphors for a whole range of
yeah,
people.
range of yeah.
which I've certainly done before.
Yeah.
So you can bring Michael Jackson look at that, hasn't he? From time to time. And what's that, Vanessa?
Yeah.
Disdain.
Yeah, but it's just like, no, it's not going to happen.
Right. So back at home, is that Tori? Must be. Yes. I mean, would you say this is her at home wondering, or?
No, it's kind of, the idea was her wanting to get dressed up and go out and. But I remember rightly, so. So,
Just say it again, please. If you have too much tension.
if you have too much tension, there's no place for emotional content in your movement.
Right.
You know, okay, you can do that in part of the context, but if you're forcing to get the speed in, and it's like there are music video works that I've seen where dancers have to move so fast and they're using a lot of tension, but it's actually not about them, it's about the band or the singer.
Right.
And therefore, in a way, their emotional expression is not as important as the person they're featuring.
Okay. Saying that's what it should be, or that's.
No, that's sometimes how it does happen in music videos, where the dancer has to be secondary to the feature singer or band. But often there are some clips where the music is actually like super fast, and the dancers are doing super good, and so there's no room for them to actually be emotional in it. And just execute these movements, get them done.
Do you think in that situation, if they'd done slow-mo, it would have been more useful, more interesting, more compelling, rather than sort of matching the speed, to go against the speed?
That's hard. It'd have to be in the context of the performer as such. I'll give you an example of where dance worked really well in a music video clip, and it was free, and it had a kind of casuality about it, but was still emotional, was David Bowie's Let's Dance with the young Indigenous people. Just, that worked. It was like complimentary to David Bowie and David Bowie to them.
So this is
the
chorus again.
Yeah. If I remember rightly, there was this one sequence.
What's your name? Somebody's coming on stage. Is that me? No.
No.
So we just have the women now.
Yes. And
All in different costumes.
yes. All going back to a hint at the opening.
Sounds to me like it's coming to an end.
Well, the idea of you've got the bride, if I remember right, and he comes on. The wife. Then you've got these whole composites of
Aspects of
the female experience with it. And there's like the conga line,
yeah.
which was, don't ask me where that came from, but it really worked. I just thought, oh, and you all caught in this almost locomotive.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's how it finishes, correct?
Yep. Because the men rolled off stage.
That's right, then rolled off stage. Okay, well that's the 43rd minute, I think. Well, thank you very much, Graeme, in this lesson. I guess I would like to call this a masterclass in actually dance composition, in a way.
Okay.
Well, I think it is, and I think it's very instructive, some of the ways you used your inspirational points, how you digested them and then projected them out and gave it to us, and then a lot of very good lessons on how to, I guess, delineate the sort of triggers, the impulses you have, and how they sort of come together and they confluence into yourself and then come out and are projected. Where do you think HaHa might stand in your trajectory?
Oh, it's always been right up there.
Has
you
it?
know, when people have asked me about what did I consider one of my best works, I've always said HaHa LM514
So you think,
with the two most important works. I went a much bigger step forward with HaHa because I had to bring the male into the equation,
right,
where it had to have a balance there. Whereas with LM514, I really didn't want a balance. I wanted to show an imbalance in terms of with Nina everyone having an implant, but Nina rebelling against, and that was a metaphor basically for conformity, and she wasn't conforming.
right.
She wasn't. And the last bit of music was the Rolling Stones, I Don't Want to Be Your Slave. So, whereas in HaHa, a similar sort of ending, like I don't want to be a slave to this world, but I made it a bit broader, I think, in the fact that you saw the bride and you saw...
Yes, you saw the
all
very
these
aspects of the feminine,
yeah,
or the
yeah.
aspects of what women can be.
And not being indulgent, I just thought they were innovative,
Yeah.
that they challenged...
Well, I suppose it's very interesting to consider, so your former wife Vanessa T and being a co-partner in the whole event, really, which is of course quite interesting, isn't it? Because of course you've broken up, but at the same time she was an indelible part of your creative life in a way, and the fact that she created a very striking setting.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly thank you very much for having me in it, because it was a high point of my dance life, really, I think, in many ways, a chance to sort of be part of that. And I mean, for any male, in any situation where he's got a domestic situation plus a work situation, these challenges, or what should I say, temptations, are ever present, really. They have to be. And the Jimmy Carter moment, I have lust in my heart, as he once said. So thank you for the chance to sort of portray that, really, and unconsummated too, so it ends up being a dream, I guess, which I guess was very, very compelling.
Right.
So thank you, Graeme, and
Well,
thank you,
thank
people.
you.
We shall finish part 3.